Welcome. My name is Ricky Bevington. I'm president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. The council is a nonpartisan membership and grant-supported organization. Our mission is to provide a forum for informed discussion of the global affairs that impact Metro Atlanta and support the city's transformation into an international economic hub. You can find information about becoming a member at the council at our website, wacatlanta.org. That's WAC Atlanta.org. Thank you so much for joining today's important conversation with Dr. Hanna Shelest. She's joining us from Odessa, Ukraine. I'd like to recognize a few members of our audience, World Affairs Council of Atlanta board members, Allison Padilla-Goodman and Bernard Taylor. Thank you for being here. And thank you to members of Atlanta's Consular Corps, Consul General of Ireland in Atlanta, and honorary Consuls General of the Czech Republic and Estonia, two nations that are not unfamiliar with Russian aggression. We'll just put it lightly. Dr. Hanna Shelest is Director of Security Programs at Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism and Editor-in-Chief of Ukraine Analytica. Ukrainian Prism is a network-based non-governmental analytics center. It fosters foreign policy analysis and expertise to enhance Ukraine's decision-making process in the spheres of foreign policy, international relations, and public diplomacy. And Ukraine Analytica is the first Ukrainian academic analytical journal on English language, on international relations, politics, and economics. Dr. Shelest has degrees from Odessa National University and has studied peace building at institutions including Bryn Mawr College here in the United States and American University in Kosovo. Dr. Hanna Shelest, we are so pleased to have you joining us. Thank you for being here.
Good evening from here. Good day for those who are cross transatlantic. And Ricky, thank you for the invitation.
And we'll share with our audience that we had Dr. Shelest on her laptop, but because it sounds like there has been some interference with communications, she switched to her phone. Dr. Shelest, why don't you just explain to us what you just said to me about Russian attacks on telecommunications?
Yes, what started just a few hours ago, Russians started shelling the TV towers and telecommunication towers. Especially in Kyiv, they targeted the biggest and the main telecommunication target. So most of our TV are currently unavailable. We are waiting for the more news. And from the lunchtime, the Wi-Fi started to disappear. The 4G is still working quite good because the network is very big in Ukraine. But unfortunately, we don't know how stable it would be. So in case any difficulties with the connection, please excuse me, because today we started to have shelling just at the outskirts of Odessa.
Take us back to Thursday. How did it begin? How did you know that Odessa was under attack?
You know, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning from the sound of the big blast. And originally, it was not an idea that something happened. I just fall asleep immediately. I thought that maybe it is some car or something happening on the street because I'm living in the downtown and it can be early morning, some extra sounds around. So, but at 8 o'clock, my family just come to my room and said, like, Anna, that started. So definitely all news were all around. We started to connect with our friends and colleagues in other cities because most of my staff are in Kyiv or in Chernihiv. It is the town just between Kyiv and Belarusian border. Plus, definitely our friends and family in eastern Ukraine, in Kharkiv and Lviv. And since then, it was just 24/7 exchange of information, minute by minute about all attacks, assaults, the situation with the house, with evacuation, and with the working issues, because immediately 99% of my colleagues started working against this aggression.
And when you say started working against this aggression, Ukrainians are not only organizing to train it for military purposes, but you're all working to get the word out. So what do you mean when your colleagues are working to, I guess, combat this with information?
It's not only disinformation that we need to combat. That's really interesting how we have now plenty of chats where we united, for example, lawyers, human rights defenders, foreign policy specialists, somebody knows how to advocate, somebody has a very vast network of politicians, somebody perfect in languages. We have the whole groups of volunteers, translators to all languages that we could find. And these people were knocking and knocking to us, asking, what help do you need? So those people who cannot take the arms or be because of some health issues, for example, or because they are far, because let's be honest, it's not only those in Ukraine. My friends in Brussels, in Vienna, in plenty of other cities, they are coordinating the work of translators, for example, or of the advocacy campaigns. They took the leave at their works, some of them even in the international organizations, but just not to have like these official affiliation. And after these working 24/7, assisting Ukraine of getting the words, especially important in many countries to speak with the politicians where they've been doubting, explaining to the public, plus work with the journalists. It's more than 500 journalists are currently, foreign journalists in Kiev, because they were coming a few days prior to the assault. They were looking to this military buildup, and others who were in their capitals and would like to have the first-hand information. It's necessary to coordinate them, to inform them, to help with translations. And for this, we have quite an army of our supporters.
You also mentioned civilians taking up arms. Are you seeing people in Odessa take up arms, just regular everyday people?
Yes, I have a lot of colleagues of mine who were the activist people that I knew who signed the contract with the Territorial Defense Forces. And currently my former boss, director of National Institute of Strategic Studies in Odessa, he was in the reserve, and at the age of 53, the first day everything happened, he just went to the special office, and since then he's on duty. Plus, you know, that is interesting that you also need support for the territorial defense and for the armed forces. So, for example, several best Odessa restaurants, all their staff are currently cooking for the armed forces. So that's also the assistance you need to have, or the barman who are doing the Molotov cocktails in stock to be prepared in case tanks are coming to the city. So, you know, you can help the armed forces in different ways. If you have the arms or you know how to use them, that is one. But also, for example, people with a special knowledge how to build the special constructions, anti-tank constructions. So our tram depot gave all these materials, the rails, and people who know how to do it were just doing the big pieces, constructions to surround the city.
Is it safe to leave your home right now? What is life like just today in Odessa on March 1st?
We have curfew from 7 p.m. till 6 o'clock in the morning. From tomorrow, we would have the ban for alcohol selling in Kyiv. We already have it for 2 days, just in case. And we have, during the day, you can move. Some places open, some closed. It depends like on the owners, how they decided. Some people are outside, schools are closed. Most of the enterprises, if they're not essential, they're closed. We see that the local authorities made as much as possible for the protection and for the notification of the city members. But also we see a lot of locals who started to take responsibility. For example, my sister is living near the beach, and that is the very important district. Like usually in the summer, that is the district of disco and bars. But now it is quite a good place for the landing assault. So they decided with their neighbors that they are patrolling their neighborhood, including for the saboteurs, because unfortunately there are plenty of saboteurs who've been sent earlier than the military assault started, plus who are trying to get to us through Transnistria. For those who don't know, all the border of Odessa region on the west, it is a separatist republic of Transnistria that belongs to Moldovan state, and that is armed forces of the Russian Federation being stationed there illegally for the last 20 years. And approximately we are speaking about 1,500 people, not that much, but it means that you don't control approximately 400 kilometers of your border. And that's from where these people with weapons are trying to get to the territory of Ukraine as well.
We actually do have a map that I would ask my team to bring up so that we can help our audience understand the geography. We've all been seeing maps of Ukraine, but Dr. Shelest, I'll just have you point out there's Odessa there to the south. And if you
To the
could simply,
southwest,
yeah.
yes, you find Odessa. If you go from Odessa to the west, to that narrow place, and go up by the Moldovan territory, that is the very narrow line, but it is Transnistria. So for you to understand that from the city of Odessa to Transnistria, I need to drive something like 30, 40 minutes. It is that close. At the same time, where you have the biggest fightings now, let's go to the north first. You see the city of Chernigiv, you see Chernobyl, you see Kiev. That's where now very, very heavy fightings are happening. Then if we go to the east, you may see the city of Sumy and Kharkiv. Kharkiv today received very heavy shelling. Their city council is destroyed. So it was the cruise missiles and everything. Then if you go to the very south where Crimea is, so yet one hotspot, it is Kherson region. You see the Kherson town. Why? It is the access of Crimea to the fresh water, the Dnieper River that is like dividing Ukraine. It is a huge river. And not far from Kherson, you have the biggest place for the fresh water that can deliver it to Crimea. Crimea almost don't have fresh water by themselves. So Russians are trying to get that place. And also you have in Mykolaiv, it is the city between Kherson and Odessa, where fighting started today as well. They're trying to get that city with a landing assault from the sea. But if we would find, for example, a map with the shelling and missiles falling within these days, you would find it in each of the cities around this map, almost everywhere. Yesterday, it was the assault just 13 kilometers from the Polish border near Lviv city. And also bases that we have, like airdromes in Ternopil, in Rovno, in Khmelnytsky, they've been assaulted as well. Not that heavily as north of the country, but still. I already see the question about the flight. No, Ukraine closed airspace immediately at the day when everything happened. So at 5 o'clock, it was the first assault. By lunchtime, we closed the airspace. There are two reasons. Reason number one is that we remember the tragedy that happened in 2014 with MH17, when the Malaysian Airlines flight with almost 300 people on board being shot by the Russian missile on the east of the country. But reason number two is as the way Russians started this assault, they started from the airstrikes. So their main power is happening from the air. It is airstrikes by missiles, cruise missiles, Iskander, Kalibr, up to 400 kilometers range, for you to understand, for those who don't know the types of the missiles the Russians are using. So they've been shooting from the territory of Belarus, from the territory of Russia. That's why it was very dangerous for the airplanes, and we didn't want to risk the lives of civilians.
Okay, great. While we have the map up, I'm just going to point out in the top left of everyone's screen, is it to say that this town, is it Liev, Dr. Shelest, where there's discussion of if the government based in Kyiv needs to leave, and we've already heard the president say he's not going anywhere, but this would be the place that is being discussed as where the government would flee to if it came to that. Is that what you're understanding?
There were talks about Lviv because not only because it is the big city on the west of the country, but all embassies, when the military buildup started, so before the assault, they evacuated, the US, Canada, many others evacuated to Lviv. Lviv is not so big to accommodate everybody. It is the old town with the like more of the not even Vienna, but Prague style or something like this. So it's not a lot of big buildings where to business centers where to put people. Still, they were accommodated. The problem is that since yesterday, Russia started to target more and more Western Ukraine as well. So unfortunately, we cannot guarantee security now anywhere. We don't know how the trajectory or the ideas, plans, tactics of Mr. Putin will be changed. The reason is that why he is also shelling the West, because many refugees are traveling in that direction. So they are leading to Poland or to Slovakia, many also to Moldova, but that is another route. But the biggest amount is to Poland, and he don't want them to go there. We already had cases of preventing civilians from going there, but not only civilians going to Poland, but the assistance we receive, humanitarian assistance we are receiving from there. For example, the group of Israeli doctors who wanted to come to Ukraine to help with the wounded. It was announced that the column of them are coming. It was quite a big group. It was targeted with one of the missiles, and we have even one doctor being killed in this incident. So, and they were in the west of Ukraine, so you understand that it was deliberate targeting, but not the some collateral damage.
Okay, I think we can pull the map down for the moment. I mentioned President Volodymyr Zelensky. Can you talk about how significant it was that he was elected in 2019 and really what he represented? And I'll share with our audience, I was one of probably less than a dozen Americans who was at Volodymyr Zelensky's election night watch party in Kyiv in 2019. So I also have some on-the-ground experience, and I can see Ukraine through an American lens. I spent several days in Kharkiv, which we've been hearing a lot about. But Dr. Shelest, tell us about why Zelensky, what he represents.
You know, that is interesting because Zelensky that we have now in February 2022 is completely different from what our country elected in 2019. You definitely remember all those talks that been at that time. He is the person without any political background or even NGO volunteers or any type of this. He's been very successful entertainment person, the actor, the owner of the biggest comedian show. I even don't know with what to compare. It's not Stephen Colbert or something like this, because he had a huge show with a lot of actors, and it was the most popular show with the TV company for the some sitcoms. The person who knew how to joke, but definitely not how to rule the country. However, many people, like 70%, elected him. There were some domestic reasons for doing this. And when originally he was talking about Russia as, I just need to sit to look into eyes of Mr. Putin and we will be able to negotiate. After December 2019 meeting in Paris of the Normandy 4, he already came with a different impression. He realized that just sitting and watching into the eyes of Mr. Putin is not changing his attitude towards Ukraine. When he started traveling to the east, talking with our soldiers and receiving the daily data of killed soldiers, it also influenced him a lot. So morally, he was more prepared, but definitely not to the war, let's be honest. So when the first shelling started, it was a big pause among all experts and journalists in Ukraine. Everybody waited how he would behave, what's happened. And I would say that how he is behaving now, he really positively surprised the whole nation. Now he has something like 90% of the popular support. To understand that before this, he had something like 25. His rating's been falling because of his economic decisions, some political decisions, populism. We see him, first of all, definitely saying, I don't need a ride, I need the ammunition, this phrase that became viral. He's spending all his time with military, with the territorial defense. He's not leaving Kyiv. He's trying to do to inform population what is really important. He's coming 3 times per day to population. We see how he's calling with the international leaders from all the countries 24/7. And what is really important, that even his opponents, political opponents, who've been very strong against him, are currently saying that he is our president, and we would discuss our domestic disagreements after everything finished. Now there is no doubt that he's not just legitimate president, but he's president in charge of the country.
And I'll just, for those who didn't hear, the Biden administration offered to evacuate Zelensky and his administration for safety, and his response was effectively no, but the way he said no was, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. And that has been the quote that people have been rallying behind as he demonstrates solidarity with the Ukrainian people and not leaving the country, even though it would be very serious, certainly symbolically and politically, if he were to be captured or injured in any way as the leader of the country. I do want to get to that in a moment, Dr. Shelest, about what it would mean if that happens. We can go through some scenarios, but I want to describe what his election night watch party was like. It was in a hot Kyiv nightclub, low lights, fun music, ping pong. I paid a little bit of ping pong, people in, casual clothing. And in so many ways, Zelensky represented in 2019 pro-Western, pro-democracy, transparency, reform. And these, of course, are things that his predecessors did not necessarily represent. So I would love for you to just share with our audience, first of all, why Zelensky represents Ukraine's shift toward Europe away from Russia.
I would like to clarify a little bit to Chuck that his predecessor was the person who changed the constitution for the EU and NATO membership. So in terms of pro-Western sentiments, especially in 2019, his predecessor, President Poroshenko, was much more Western. Mr. Zelensky, when he came, he tried to address all population as much as possible. So he tried to accommodate different ideas about the Western way. But for the last 2 years, he's been changing. He realized what does mean in reality our cooperation with the European Union and even with NATO. Because when he came, his statements about NATO was quite dubious. Let's be honest. We're not trying to make an angel from him. He learned. He really learned and saw the differences, and he managed to put different people around him. There are still some people around him with some points in their biographies that made us doubt about how much they are pro-Western, but at least they are not pro-Russian. That's also very important. But as for now, two main positions, or even three main positions, Secretary for National Security Council, Minister of Defense, and Minister of Foreign policy, people who clearly understand what does mean EU, what does mean NATO, why we're choosing these paths, why we would like to be with the West, and what to do in these situations. And what is interesting that Minister of Defense is the first really civilian minister. Previously, Ukraine had the jure civilian ministers, but they were retired officers. So definitely you couldn't consider them. This guy, Mr. Reznikov, he's a lawyer. He's never been associated with, he's been a commercial lawyer with very successful career before. And he joined the government previously as the Minister for Temporarily Occupied Territories when he's been drafting legislation for these. And suddenly he's becoming Minister of Defense. But he acts very good. One of the reasons that he has very good head of staff and head of general staff, and of the different branches of the armed forces, what is really important. So now we don't have the competition between ministry and military. Ministry is doing what they can the best, supply, logistics, policy, and directing negotiations if needed. So it seems to me that all this evolution of Mr. Zelensky happened partially by learning, partially by accident, because definitely in 2014, he was not expecting that he would need to lead the war. The perspective of war looked less and less possible. But at the same time, probably this unity of population of the assistance that he received from different sides, that's what is helping him now.
I spoke with a member of the Ukraine territorial defense, which I think in American terms would be kind of like the National Guard, as I understand it. Please correct me if I'm wrong. They're not enlisted. Well, let's stop there, and then I'll ask my questions. Yeah. Why don't you explain what the territorial defense is?
Territorial Defense Forces of Ukraine appeared on the 1st of January this year, so it is very fresh.
Okay.
They consist from three levels. Approximately 10,000, they're regular military who are in charge of commanding. They are part of the land forces. But they are divided into 25 offices according to the 25 regions of Ukraine. Then you had approximately 150,000 originally. Now we have more, but what we planned, of the civilians who are coming, taking their practices, training with the armed forces, but not serving in the armed forces. So they can be called in case of necessity. And these people can be called only at the territory of their regions. So they cannot be called in case of, I don't know, earthquake or something like this. They are called in case of the special period, as what we have now. But then you also have the third level. It is civilians and volunteers, civilians like local administrations that are assisting to the territorial defense in case of necessity. What they can do is protection of critical infrastructure, patrolling. So some operations like these, they are not expected to take the open fight, even that they can have their weapons and they're taught how to do it. So it's quite a very new and very special issue that we have now.
And it's in response to the Russian buildup of troops on the border.
Exactly.
Okay, great. It's extraordinary. It sounds like it's largely, except for the 10,000 professional military members, it's largely volunteer, or is there a draft on?
No, those 10,000 who are officially with the armed forces, they are the same as Navy or something. That is the people who are with a salary, that is their main job. So these territorial defense, but these people are in charge of high command positions. So that is the leadership, that is the logistics, and for the territorial defense, and some of the commanders on the ground, because you can have like Kyiv command, then you have Odessa command, and then you can have like how many towns we have in Odessa region. In each town, you have the person, two persons in charge, plus few staff who are in charge of HR, because you need to enlist, you need to train. So these staff, they are regular armed forces.
And the rest are volunteers?
The rest are volunteers, those who are trained, but the rule is that if they are called, their place of work, the main job, should be secured for them. And that's for the time of being called, they are continuing to receiving their salary, except of definitely like bonuses and all the stuff, but their basic salary is secured for them.
Okay. I spoke with a member of the territorial defense who said that for him, this war started in 2014. Maybe you can describe more of the events of 2014 and whether or not you agree with him.
Absolutely. That's why we hated the headlines of international media in January who've been discussing, will Russia invade Ukraine? Because the reaction was they've already done it. So 2014, February, Russia started annexation of Crimea, and the first military being used in Crimea in March 2014. Because it was not peaceful. The first killed officer of Ukraine was in Crimea, not in the east of the country. That was the very beginning. Then events in April started in what you know as Donbas. It's not very correct name, but let's say in the separate districts of Lugansk and Donetsk regions. Because for those, just a small for you to understand, Donbas, it is the short from Donetsk coal basin. It's a geographical name. But the problem is that this geographical meaning is coming almost from Dnipropetrovsk, from the middle of the country, to the Russian territory. And for example, city of Lugansk, it's not Donbas from that meaning. But just for media, it was easier than to say separate districts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions to speak it as Donbas. So in Donbas, Russians started to capture buildings of government. They started to occupy towns. And in summer 2014, heavy fights happened. Such names as Ilovaisk or Debaltseva or Cybergs from Donetsk airport, they became well known around the world. And at that time, a lot of soldiers been killed or captured. And since then, we had the contact line with military there, with the joint operational forces, operations, and with almost daily killings, because snipers been working for the last few years very actively. Approximately 40,000 people been killed on the east. So that is before the events happening now. That's why for even morally, the war started in 2014. But many of the people who joined territorial defense, that is veterans of that operation on the East, because we had something like 400,000 veterans after 8 years of the conflict. So these people having the experience, knowledge, skills, they've been joining territorial defense actively.
We have a couple of minutes left before we go to questions and answers. We already have a bunch, and I will encourage our audience to use the Q&A function, please, to ask your question. Please be brief. We will try to get it to as many as possible. But I want to touch on some themes of democracy as well as propaganda, and then maybe wrap up with your predictions for what happens next. What kind of propaganda are you seeing, or have you seen leading up to this?
As for now, the propaganda is very simple. The Russians are trying to send the messages that Ukraine should not fight, and the government already surrendered, so that's what you need to do. And that the West left you alone, you're fighting alone, you don't need them. Now the message is very clear and very short. However, with the previous situation, it was quite wide. I would say that 14, 15, it was the open propaganda. But people became resistant to it, so the pro-Russian propaganda didn't work since probably 2017. All our research demonstrated it. So Russians started to work through the proxies. They used local media or the tabloid websites. They started to use pro-Russian politicians and to throw the messages via them. They were not using openly pro-Russian messages, only few. In general, they worked with the following: that Ukrainian economy will die without Russia, brotherhood of the nations, that we are one nation, one people, that's why we need to be one state. Then there were a lot of anti-Western narratives being sent, from saying that the West is dying, European Union is not successful because of Brexit, that they are violating traditional values and going out of their Orthodox or Christian values. They were speaking a lot about that European Union and NATO don't want Ukraine. They would never take you. So why you need to ask them for membership? Energy, there were plenty of energy narratives that Ukraine is so much dependent that we cannot live without Russia. But there were also many different, because Ukraine's been doing, different Ukrainian organizations were doing many research about disinformation. And we found that, for example, during the COVID, Russians been very actively working on anti-Western vaccines. So there were a lot of anti-American sentiments, for example, that the virus being made in the US laboratory in Ukraine. And so the US is guilty in all this COVID situation. That was interesting because the same narrative being found in Moldova and Georgia as well. So it was not the accident or some rumors, that was intentional campaign to make the US guilty in everything what been happening in spring 2020.
I realize, Dr. Shelest, that you cannot speak for more than 40 million Ukrainians, but I would like to pose the question of what Ukrainians really want.
Freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of responsibility, freedom to decide our future. You know, we've been discussing with you before that Ukrainians had a new slogan for a few years. It came accidentally. It's named "Freedom is our religion." It was really interesting because when Ukraine won the Eurovision Song Contest, and it should be in Kyiv in 2015, at the main square, one of the main buildings being burned during the revolution a year before. And it was very ugly view. So director of one of the strategic communication companies just came and said, like, we need to cover it. Like, it's not nice, tourists are coming. And he was thinking like what to put there. And this phrase came to his mind. But it became so good that now all Ukrainians are using it as it is from the Middle Ages. So if I would not know the person, I would never know like the story, how it happened. But the credit never being paid like for him, even for popularity. But that's really demonstrated the popularity of this phrase, that it touched the feelings of all Ukrainians, that dignity and freedom are so important for Ukrainians, that it is up to us to decide with which countries to unite, who can be our president, what future we want to our country. Maybe we would like to be with China, not or with, I don't know, Nicaragua, but not with the European Union. But that should be us who would decide it, not the Russian Federation.
If Kyiv is taken and President Zelensky is not free to move or to communicate with people, what happens?
I think that at least as for now, he's trying to communicate as much as possible. As soon as the gossip started that he left the country and Russians been pushing this through their media, he immediately just took his telephone and put in Instagram and Twitter the video that, come on, I'm here near my administration, or the photo with his closest staff, showing also the video like, oh, that is the prime minister, that is the head of presidential staff. We are here just near the building, so you know where we are. That helps. His freestyle of communication this time really works. Unfortunately for tomorrow, we're expecting very heavy attack for the communications, exactly with the campaign to make people to think that the government surrendered. Our intelligence already informed everybody to be careful, that it should be meshing with the mobile operators, that we expect cyber attack and everything for tomorrow. So people are trying to be prepared to know that president is available, he's in the country.
How are you and your family preparing for what might come next?
I don't know, we have some few touristic cards from our trips, so I just asked my parents to check, are they working? So in case of something, to have additional mobile operators, the foreign for communications maybe. Let's see how it goes. At least we know where all of us, my family all stayed in Odessa, nobody left. And that makes it easier, because even if I don't have any communication, I can sit in my car and to drive few streets to check what is with the other members of my family. But with all others, I mean, you can't be prepared for everything. And that's what Ukrainians learned within these 8 years. That's why we started with the resilience campaign, and with drafting the concept of national resilience. It's been adopted last year. The idea is that you can't prepare for everything, but you need quickly to recap and to have backup plan and know how to restore everything. So I know that city council, for example, before the attack, been planning what to do in case communication disappear, and they had a plan to put people at each street with the megaphones. So to make the announcement, the mayor been discussing these issues, how to organize, do we have capacity? So they were definitely, let's see how it works in case something happening, but at least these plans being discussed before the assault, so everybody are aware that something like this can happen.
It's just an extraordinary mental image to have your sister and others patrolling the beach of Odessa to warn of a invasion, people lined up with megaphones to communicate.
And try to imagine that my sister is an artist. She's the painter. She's definitely not from the, even not from the sports society or something like this. So as she was joking, because there were plenty of markings for the landing operations, like where to hold directions in case they don't know. And when she saw it, she just took her colors, her painting instruments, and came for clothes, like to covering it. And she was joking, okay, at least I know that my skills will be useful. That was a joke, we laughed from it, but that's definitely, as we said, everybody are doing what they can. She saw she could do it, she had the materials, she went and did it.
And those were almost spray paint markings, right? So that the Russian military would know strategic locations.
We have this problem in different cities. Our security services are working very like hardly on it. There are several types of markings that are done around cities. First type of the markings, they are the geographical, like marking destinations, because they many of them are coming without telephone, so they can't use GPS, they don't know the local terrain, and Ukrainian authorities been trying to get rid from the street signs, from something like this, to help them. So that's number one. Number two type of markings, it is the places, it is with a special painting, luminescent. So it will be visible even during the night where you can shoot or shoot, yeah, where you can land. Then there were lightnings. Also, we found out, at least in Odessa, yeah, at the roofs of several buildings, there were special lightning. So like to show where helicopters can see it. The locals broke these lightnings. And in some places, people were, and security services been founding a special radio marking. I'm not sure in the English word for these, but those that were giving the signals for the landing so they can go. And in Kiev, they noticed the lightning in the windows. So they've been, saboteurs been renting the flats on the particular route and putting the special color lights in the window. So in the night, when, for example, helicopters or anything else is coming, they know the route to the strategic object, like military of defense, for example.
It's so chilling, and I have so many more questions, but I'd like to get to some for our audience. I encourage those who have questions for Dr. Shelest to use our Q&A function. We'll get to as many as we can. Let's start with one from Edward, who asks, Putin says Ukrainians and Russians are one people. Explain to us why he is wrong.
It's very easy. Are British and Americans are the same people? No, even if you had the joint history. Are Canadians and French, or French and Belgians are the same people? No, nobody cares that it was the same empire. Even if not to go to the colonial times, but let's speak about the European, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austrians and Hungarians. In our case, the question is that originally they were the same tribes, but we are speaking about something like 8th century, they were Slavic tribes. But then in around 9th century, Ukraine created the first state. At that time, Moscow even didn't exist as a village. And with the development of all feudal history, and here we would go for years and years, it's happened, and due to the invasion to the territory of Ukraine and so on, that 2 states appeared, then 3 states appeared because of Belarus. Now, when you go to people, we have some similarities, like Spanish and Italian, a lot of Latin nations, they have similarities in language, yeah. So we have the same roots for the words, but 3 languages are completely different. Russians cannot understand when we are talking. We have more similarities with Polish language than with Russian grammatically. Well, look at our national suits, they're very different. Look to many traditions, they're also very different. The question is that in the 17th century, Russia occupied Ukraine for the first time. Then in the 19th century, they twice prohibited Ukrainian language and culture. They closed theaters, libraries, and most of the institutions that could work with the culture. So that, and because they occupied and were part of the Russian Empire, so it was definitely mutual influence in some of the things. But still, to speak about the single nation or something like this, it would be so much illogical, just even from the formal, not going in more details about mentality and traditions. For us, we are joking here that Ukraine never had a king. That's why we are speaking about this freedom and democracy from the ancient times. And for us, that's something normal. And for Russians, they know what is meant inside. And they prefer the strong power. They never doubt their leaders. Ukrainians adopting their leaders from the second day they elected them. So this mentality that is very difficult for Russians to understand, and that clearly demonstrates how diverse can be Ukrainians, but still very different from the Russians.
We have a follow-up question on that theme. Gary asks, every conflict has at least 2 sides. How do you understand Putin's motivation and justification for invading Ukraine? And I might add, and why now?
His motivation is simple and difficult because this motivation is not rational. This conflict is very emotional. For Mr. Putin, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest tragedy of the 20th century. He talked about this openly at different public events. Also, he is quite fond of the Russian Empire and the times of the empire. So in this way, you cannot, from his perspective, you cannot have empire and Soviet Union as an empire type of the state as well, without the long-term history and without the great history. So he preferred to appropriate Ukrainian history, Belarus history, and history of many nations living in the Russian Empire, and to make this glory of the times when it is only Washington and Moscow can decide what is happening in the world. So for him, that is imperialistic thoughts plus the revanchist thoughts, plus the idea that he would like to get to history. He really are talking a lot about this in his speeches about getting to the history. So he imagined this story for himself. Why now? I can, like, that is definitely speculations, but my opinion is, and from what I'm following from the colleagues in the Russian Federation, after the United States left Afghanistan, and how it happened last year, he decided that that US is weak, that US is not going to support partners, and that is a good moment to use the opportunity. Plus, elections in Germany happened in the new government, so Angela Merkel was not in charge, and France is expecting elections in April. So three powers that he more or less respected were not in the position to protect Ukraine. That's why he decided either now or he was not sure when the next moment would come.
And yet, Michael asks, were you surprised at the overwhelming positive response and support from the West? Did you ever think the USA, NATO, and EU would come together and provide such solidarity?
I would say that Ukrainians still not very happy, because I knew how much forces we need to apply to get many of this support. For you, it looks as everybody immediately started this, but I know how much work our diplomats did within the last months. Not only within the last months, but the last months in particular. How much work activists or experts did, how many advocacy campaigns we've been doing within these days. And each of the decisions been lobbied very hardly. So many countries, even our close friends, been really doubting should they help or not. And it took a lot of efforts. Still, we see that there are quite a number of politicians who are behaving not very good, let's say, and they are preventing some types of the assistance now, or preventing sanctions. Like now Italy is okay, they made decision, but it took 24 hours to make decision about sanctions because Italy tried to exclude luxury goods from these sanctions. And they were really hardly debating about what should be under the sanctions, what not. So that's the reality. And it looks very nice from media, but de facto it is very hard work.
Which you and your organizations have been doing for years, we might add. Mariana asks, how long do you anticipate this to go on if Putin is not stopped? I understand it's next to impossible to capture him. So what's the next best scenario?
The next best scenario is Russians capture him by themselves, understanding that they're ruining their own country, first of all, with everything that is happening. We see, as for now, that the Russian army is not so mighty as they wanted to present themselves, as the West being afraid of. The Russian plan was to take Kyiv in 2 days. We are at the end of day 6 and still not successful, despite all the shelling that we have. So the Russian army is becoming quite demoralized. Not all, but more and more, and we have more and more cases of the Russian soldiers just going to Ukrainian forces with a white flag, saying that nobody told them they need to fight. They received a command that Ukraine already surrendered, you just need to come to Kyiv and to occupy it. So this absence of frank conversation with your own armed forces is definitely not make positive image to the leadership of the Russian armed forces and Ministry of Defense. But also sanctions work. We see how the Russian people started to react, and from I would say from rejecting that is possible, at the day 6 we are coming to more and more support. We just understand that first a lot of people are afraid to go on the streets because how previous protests been broken, but also, unfortunately, quite a number of population, at least 30% of Russians support the military actions. And that been demonstrated by their own sociological surveys within the last half a year. So that's why I'm saying that the next best scenario is Russians getting oligarchs getting against Mr. Putin.
We have several questions just about the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Can you talk to us about the food supply, particularly in areas that are under severe attack? Are you aware of anything?
We have approximately 500,000 refugees as for now. These people on the western borders and those countries supporting, and many organizations and people are supporting there. In cities where heavy shelling been happening, most of the cities being prepared, so they put supplies to the supermarket and everything. In Chernigiv, at least yesterday, my friends tried to get to the supermarket. It's been some food yet, or some storages that they made for themselves, because when you were expecting attack, people were putting some, I don't know, spaghetti, some simple things to feed the family, water, and so on. Some of the small shops, they're lacking food, we can see it. But the big supermarkets, at least as for now, have the basic things. What is good for Ukraine, that we produce a lot of food by ourselves. So sometimes it's just a matter of logistics, how to bring this food to the respective places for selling. But in terms of availability, Ukraine produce a lot of food, proceeding all this stuff by ourselves. That makes it a little bit easier for distribution around the country.
We started this conversation talking about Russian attacks on Ukrainian telecommunications. We saw on Twitter, of course, that Elon Musk had offered Starlink. What are you hearing about alternative people helping with communication in Ukraine? Is that working, Starlink?
I know that at least it was in the news that Starlink equipment arrived today in the morning, and they've been assembling it. So I don't know, is it working, but definitely already or not, like that is a very technical issue for me. And it seems to me that the primer target will be like audience for the governmental structures and for the military. First of all, those who will be in need. For the population, it will be the at the second, not the primarily importance. First of all, we needed for the government to give this information, to have the possibilities to coordinate. So I'm expecting that probably tomorrow we will know more news about this. Others, there are not so many possibilities for this support. Luckily, we have quite a good coverage for the 4G internet in the country. I would say you that internet, mobile internet in Ukraine are 3 times better than in Washington, at least, from my personal experience, and in New York. So that we had plenty of Wi-Fi spots around, and till tonight, my Wi-Fi was wonderful. So I didn't have any problems being here. Like only now, it is available. It's not very good for video, but at least everything is working and not that big problems. And even my friends who are sitting in the shelters in Chernigiv, they are sending us, like they cannot send videos or something like this, but they are chatting with us in messengers, so they have access to internet as for now.
In our last few minutes, Dr. Shelest, I'll ask to put on your military analyst hat. We have a question from John who asks, why hasn't Ukraine taken offensive military action against Russian military forces and sites in Russia that are staged to attack Ukraine?
Probably because we've never been an aggressor, and we consider these as invasion of Ukraine, not as Russian-Ukrainian war. We didn't initiate it, and we don't want civilians to be assaulted. So first of all, we are defending our land, and that is the main strategy, to make Russians to get out, not to attack them. Even that, I would say that our military already made 2 airstrikes against the military airports. One is near Taganrog and another one not far from Rostov. It was done because the heavy missiles been shoot from there. So that's why today such decision was made. But it was the first case, and it would not be the primary task of Ukrainian armed forces.
We have so many more questions that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to because I promised Dr. Shelest that we would just be 1 hour. She has other engagements and of course needs to rest her voice for other media interviews. We're just so grateful for your time. I think I speak for everyone who has commented and who's here watching today that we would like to know what Ukrainians need from Americans, from those of us in this audience right now. What can we do?
Political support, for sure, for those decisions that the White House are doing. That's important because support for the sanctions and everything, everybody needs to understand why it is happening. It can be even the very simple things. Our human rights defenders just started a campaign asking foreigners not to buy Russian goods. Let's speak about starting from vodka to other stuff that you can find less in the US shops, but in Europe, for example, that they're available. And you can spread the news because we know that even in the United States, Russians fed quite a number of experts who are now spreading disinformation in their social networks. So check your social networks hygiene, try to ban these people who are spreading open disinformation and just speak about them openly because they should be ashamed of what they are doing. That's important for the United States as well, because the same methods can be used anytime against you. And just for those who are interested, I will recommend probably 2 sources that can be easy to follow in English. We initiated them. One is on Twitter. If you find Ukraine World, it is with a yellow profile. That is the old project that been just for informing people, but now we're trying to accumulate there a lot of news in English, and in Twitter that is easier. And the second, it is the website pravda.com.ua/ENG. That is one of the most trustworthy news websites since the revolution. And now a lot of translators are helping them to translate for the foreign audience the basic news, what is double checked. So that is something that may be of your interest if you want a quick check of what is happening in Ukraine.
And I will commit to our audience that the World Affairs Council of Atlanta will be producing resource guides, both for local media here in Atlanta, for local reporters to be using, as well as for the general public. We will have verified charitable organizations that will be vetting, also news resources that we will be making sure the right places for you to be going for information, and we will be distributing those this week. So please subscribe to our newsletter. We'll be sharing that through there and our social media channels. And mark your calendars for Thursday. This Thursday, March 3rd. We'll be having a virtual conversation with Pavlo Kazan, a major in the Ukrainian territorial reserves. He's going to be discussing what Dr. Shelest has described, this brand new infrastructure of civilians who are volunteering to defend their country. He has been out training civilians. I talked to him just on Sunday, and he's going to be joining the World Affairs Council of Atlanta live at noon this coming Thursday. So join us for that. Dr. Hanna Shelest, there are really no words to express our gratitude for you taking this time, and also our well wishes for you and your family.
Thanks a lot. And I couldn't reject the Marshall Memorial Fellow invitation.
Hanna and I are both graduates of a German Marshall Fund Marshall Memorial Fellowship, and we are kindred spirits in that alumni group. So Dr. Shelest, thank you for your work, and we hope to see you soon, and good luck.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for invitation. Always glad to explain what is happening here.
And again, subscribe to our newsletter for more Ukrainian programming. You can find that at wacatlanta.com. And thank you to our graduate students, Anna Petrova of the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies and Laura Brower from the Robinson College of Business, and our interns, Kanko Zonu and Murphy Reef. Everything we do at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta does have a team of people behind the camera. And we enjoyed having you, Dr. Shelest, and our audience today. Have a great one.